It is my honor to introduce Jennifer Siebel, the writer, the director, and the producer of the 2011 Sundance documentary film Misrepresentation, which explores how the media's inaccurate portrayals of women have led to the underrepresentation of women in positions of power and influence. Coinciding with the distribution of her film, Ms. Newsom launched misrepresentation.org, very clever, a call to action movement that provides women and girls the tools to realize their full potential. She serves as the founder as well as the chief executive officer of misrepresentation.org. Recently, she joined the League of Extraordinary Women by Fast Company and was named one of the most influential women in business by the San Francisco Business Times. And in 2011, one of the 150 fearless women who shake the world by Newsweek Daily Beast. She's a graduate of Stanford University and Stanford's Graduate School of Business. You know her as well in some other walks of life, but she is here as Jennifer Siebel, and Jennifer Siebel Newsom to talk about the extraordinary work that she has done and continues to do. Please give her a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pro Tem. Thank you. We're going to show you a quick little trailer, and then I will give a talk, and I really look forward to the Q&A. What do you know? There's an ad.
Nice truck, guys, huh? Did you just get washed?
Listen, I still get shotgun, so...
The media is the message and the messenger, and increasingly a powerful one.
In a world of 1 million channels, people try to do more shocking things to break through the clutter. They resort to violent images, or sexually offensive images, or demeaning images.
When is it going to be enough? There is no appreciation for women intellectuals. It's all about the body, not about the brain.
You all saw the photo from the weekend of Hillary looking so haggard and looking like 92 years old. Breast implants. Did you have them or not?
If you waterboarded Nancy Pelosi, she wouldn't admit to plastic surgery.
The fact that media are so derogatory to the most powerful women in the country, then what does it say about media's ability to take any woman in America seriously?
I have close friends that will go to the bathroom and put on like 10 pounds of makeup, you know, and you're at school to learn.
I remember 5th grade, I was worrying about my weight, and now I'm in 9th grade, I'm still worrying about my weight.
As a culture, women are brought up to be fundamentally insecure. Media creates consciousness, and if what gets put out there that creates our consciousness is determined by men, we're not going to make any progress.
Little boys and little girls, when they're 7 years old, an equal number want to be president of the United States when they grow up. But then you ask the same question when they're 15, and you see this massive gap emerging.
We're shortchanging voices that are urgently needed in public forums from ever getting to the table.
As the most powerful country in the world, if you're not standing for the right values and for the right principles, that's a loss for the world.
You get a woman in the Oval Office, most powerful person in the world, what's the downside?
You mean besides the PMS and the mood swings?
The media treats women like shit, and it's horrible, and it's like, I don't know how we survive it. I don't know how we rise above it.
You can't be what you can't see.
It's extremely important for women to be writing their own stories and giving them to people to really emotionally become impacted by.
The media can be an instrument of change. It can awaken people and change minds. It depends on who's piloting the plane.
So, given that we're in California, I find it necessary to talk about media, but I'm going to start with a story close to home. When my daughter Montana was born, and Gavin, my husband, was mayor of San Francisco, not surprisingly, Montana received many gifts of pink and lots of comments on her looks. A little over a year and a half later, when our son Hunter was born, Hunter received fewer comments on his appearance, and I think he's quite handsome, lots of blue, and interestingly, quite a few silver cups and bibs displaying the White House insignia. He even received a letter from the president and the first lady, and separately a letter from the vice president and second lady, welcoming him into the world, suggesting that the world was his oyster and that he was its pearl and that he could do and be and achieve anything. Well, we were extremely flattered to receive such gifts, even though secretly I wondered why the White House had not sent such letters to Montana. And then I had an epiphany, whereupon, in opening yet another gift for Hunter, I found a blue t-shirt with messaging in large caps, "Future President." Wow, I thought. Montana, our eldest, but also our girl, never received even the suggestion that she too could be president, that her opportunities in life were limitless. It's innocent acts or non-acts like this that happen every single day to our children right out of the womb. And our young girls, who hear every one of those messages about their looks and so few about their capacity to lead, are taught that their value lies in their youth, their beauty, and their sexuality, while their brothers and male peers are taught early on that they are our natural-born leaders. Our biological differences aside, and we do have them, it really does start with culture and how we socialize our children. Gender extremes have become so normalized in all of us that we're not even conscious of them, and the marketplace further reinforces a culture that devalues our women and girls while expanding the opportunities available to our men and boys. By the way, we're all complacent, especially those of us who are so busy with our careers and our lives that we forget about the other parent in the room. We forget about the most powerful cultural messenger of all, the media, and its impact on our kids. Today's kids consume upwards of 11 hours of media content a day, between the iPad, at the bus stop, on the freeway, and in the magazine stands. Our kids are consuming sex and violence 24/7, and it's only gotten worse with infotainment and reality TV. Girls in particular see between the ages of 11 and 14 see on average 500 advertisements a day that are directed at them and their insecurities. The average boys, those of you that have boys will find this interesting, spend 30 minutes a week in conversation with their father compared to over 44 hours a week in front of TV, watching video games, or on the internet. And if you haven't been watching much media lately, you know that it's filled with sexism, misogyny, and sexual objectification. In fact, studies prove that the more TV our boys and men watch, the more sexist they are in their attitudes and behavior towards women. And the more TV girls and women watch, the more insecure they are and the less likely they are to see their potential. Interestingly, in G-rated movies, female characters are just as likely to be wearing sexually revealing clothing as in R-rated movies. And don't get me started on the media-manufactured princess culture, as a mother of a 3-year-old daughter who asked me about Cinderella. As I remind her, the sole purpose of being a girl, according to the princess world, is that a prince on a white horse comes and rescues you and takes care of you. It's disempowering. It's limiting for girls, and it puts enormous pressure on boys and men. Women learn their value, once again, is in their youth, beauty, and sexuality, and not in their capacity to lead. And boys learn that power equals dominance, control, and aggression. Here's how the status quo of women is represented in media, looking at primetime and family film. In family film, women comprise only 3.4% of characters who are employed in the C-suite. 3.4%. And only 3 female characters are at the pinnacle of the political career. In fact, 2 of them are members of the U.S. House of Representatives, and they don't speak. There are only 2 female engineers in family film compared to 26 male engineers. There are no female chief justices and no female DAs. In primetime, there are no female engineers, no female justices, and no female DAs. Interesting. Let me remind you that children's brains aren't fully formed until they're in their late 20s, according to the latest report. So to assume that children at 12 or 14 or 16 have the same emotional and cognitive maturity as adults, it's nuts. They have different intellectual and emotional capacities, making them a much more vulnerable class of citizens. You all know that. But in fact, and I'm learning more about brain plasticity with our documentary that we're currently working on called the Masculinity series, which looks at our boys and extremes of masculinity imposed on our boys in our culture. A leading neuroscientist from UCSF just told me that we, as citizens and creators, and basically all of us, are too stupid, his exact words, we're too stupid to recognize that there are serious consequences to brain plasticity given all this violent hypersexual media. We need to start studying the impacts as fast as we're churning out the products and technology, because most of it, in fact, is not good. Truth be told, the media is killing our daughters, it's distracting our daughters, it's killing their confidence and ambition, and it's robbing our boys of empathy and emotion. Interestingly, a few studies that have come out, 56% of 13-year-old girls are unhappy with their bodies. That number increases to 78% by age 17. 9 out of 10 girls in another study want to change at least one aspect of their physical appearance. So what do we have? What's the result? What's the real issue going on here? We have body dysmorphic disorder. We have low self-esteem. We have depression, self-abuse, self-objectification, and ironically, lower political efficacy. This is a public health crisis. It really is, and it's increasingly global when 80% of global media is American media. 6 out of 10 girls from a global study stated that they stopped participating in the things they love because they're uncomfortable with one aspect of how they look. They're unable to pursue their purpose and their passions in life because of low self-esteem. So we have a public health crisis as well as a major political efficacy issue. A reminder from the trailer that we saw earlier, when little girls and boys are 7 years old, 30% of them want to be president of the United States. But when you ask them that same question at the age of 15, you see a massive gap emerging between the boys and girls. What do we have now? We have a glass ceiling of women's representation in government, business, entertainment, military, religion, culture, you name it, pretty much across the board. So women hold 3% of clout positions in mainstream media, 9% of directors, and 13% of film writers in the top 250 grossing films. We're 18% of Congress. The equivalent body in Rwanda is 56.3% female. We're just over 4.2% of Fortune 500 CEOs, and you all know your numbers here in California. There are 31 women in the entire California legislature, and the numbers aren't going up. Women just need a seat at the table. Their voices need to be heard. And unfortunately, they're not going to get there on their own without our help. That's where misrepresentation comes into play. So we created this movie. We've launched this movement. We're making our boys film and boys series to complement because we're all in this together. I want to talk to you about some policy ideas, some economic incentive ideas that I would be so grateful to discuss with you and support in any way. Because I'm a firm believer that as California goes, so goes the rest of the nation. I steal that line from my husband all the time. So what can government do to regulate or incentivize media and halt this national health crisis? And remember, we are the home of Hollywood. We are the home of the gaming industry. So we have an opportunity here. We have an opportunity to right this wrong. In the 70s, let's remind us all that we had the Family Hour, regulated by the FCC, where you couldn't broadcast inappropriate content before 9 p.m. So what is the FCC doing now? I know that's not your domain, but let's not forget that media used to be a public asset, and yet if you look at the FTC and the FCC, neither are focused on the media's impact on our kids' brains and minds. Other countries have taken steps in a much healthier direction. Sweden, as an example, bans advertising to children under the age of 12. So imagine raising your family in Sweden. You wouldn't have to worry about all the violent, sexualized media and commercials and ads that are popping up in between the cartoons. In Greece, they've actually limited the kinds of programming and advertisements to children between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. So there are strict rules enforced there. You know, we have regulations on tobacco and alcohol advertising, so why not hypersexualization? I mean, we all have to admit, you have the pornification of mainstream media going on here in the U.S. The porn industry is one of the most powerful industries, and we're all afraid to stand up to it to a certain extent. Well, it's increasingly seeped into our mainstream media culture, and our kids are exposed to it. It's why you have the sexualization of girls at younger and younger ages. It's why you have this major health epidemic. But so we've regulated tobacco and advertising, and alcohol advertising. So why not, you know, violence, extremes of hypersexualization and dehumanizing misogyny? And what about really looking at warning labels on printed media and warning alerts on visual media? We were just down, just think about two major media events recently, the Oscars and the Super Bowl. Both are touted as family content, family programs. But, you know, I was there at the Oscars with our documentary, The Invisible War, and the misogyny that was flashing into the homes of billions of people around the globe is not just distasteful, it's harmful. And yet it's created in our entertainment industry. We need to do more, because that's not family-friendly programming. We could reevaluate the MPA ratings. You know, the UK, as an example, I was just there. They have an independent advertising standards authority, which has been used by concerned citizens to call out sexism. We would love to see the government working with the industry here. Interestingly, in the UK, in 2011 alone, their work led to almost 5,000 ads being changed or withdrawn. That was about a quarter of the commercials and ads. That's a big deal. That's a large amount of ads that were changed or withdrawn. And this was a partnership, and you could create a public-private partnership here. You could create an entertainment standards authority, much like the GLAAD model, but again, a partnership between the public and private sector. You could form a media content commission. I know you have your film commission. I'm not really clear about what your commissions are doing, but what if you had a media content commission comprised of consumers, advocates, and parents, not just media people, where at least 2/3 are not media people, not media representatives, to rate and monitor content from film, TV, gaming, and advertising, as well as to provide healthy media guidelines and a check and balance of sorts. We actually provided you all, I don't know if you have them, but a definition of healthy media that leaders across the country in the media space came up with that I think are very helpful for improving the representation of women and girls in media. You could sponsor a piece of legislation similar to the Truth in Advertising Act, which is currently in discussion at the federal level. The act would require advertising that's meaningfully changed the human form through photoshopping or airbrushing to carry a truth in advertising label. These labels will simply state that the models shown have been altered. Again, no judgments, no morality, just transparency and clarity. And then just a reminder that we have the ability to regulate what kinds of media surround all public buildings. Interestingly, just a side note, a woman who discovered at the bus stop near her daughter's school in Manhattan, her 4-year-old daughter's school, noted a really hypersexual pornographic ad, and she called Mayor Michael Bloomberg's office, and that ad was pulled down the next day. She shouldn't even have to do that. I mean, it's common sense, right? So there's so much more we could be doing to protect our kids. If cigarette billboards are banned near schools, why are sexualized and misogynistic images okay? And again, thinking about the messages that those are communicating to our kids. And then, you don't have to, but the studio system, and I know they could do this, and I think some of them really would enjoy doing this, they could promote healthy media PSAs and public awareness campaigns nationally. We actually have some incredible PSAs. Our friend and colleague Gina Davis has created some greatest PSAs through her Gender Media Institute and her C. Jane Institute. But working together, we can create that which could be inspirational and counteract the media's negative messaging, both to our girls and our boys. So there's a lot that we have. It's just not getting the exposure because it doesn't have the pipelines that are accessible to it for exposure. And then just focus on education. And I'm almost wrapping up here. But I realize with all of your budget cuts, I realize there's gendered media literacy isn't always the forefront of where money should go to in schools, but misrepresentation has created a gendered media literacy program that's in 960 schools across the state of California, 500 of which we've gifted through our California Public Education Program. And this is critical. This is critical because of the messages that our kids are consuming about what it is to be a boy and what it is to be a girl. So I welcome conversation around that, but it's just essential that kids are given the tools to deconstruct media's images and media's messages. As we know, they're not healthy. And then I just want to point out, and I don't know where you all are with this, but just a reminder, because I'm connecting the dots here, with the importance of the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. It sends a troubling message to all women and girls in California when this commission in particular is on the chopping block every time we have a new budget. Studies show that anywhere from 25 to 40% of California women experience physical, intimate partner violence in their lifetime. Nationwide, 1 in 4 women are abused by a partner during their lifetime. 1 in 6 women are survivors of rape or attempted rape. 15% of those survivors are under the age of 12. And then let's connect the dots with the economy. In the U.S., women are the primary breadwinners or co-breadwinners in 2/3 of American households. And yet, white women still make 78 cents on the man's dollar. African American women are now making only 62 cents, and Latina women 53 cents. Again, we're not taking care of our women and girls, and we're not giving them the incentives to have careers and to stay in leadership and to use their voices. So if you really invest in this Women's Commission, a partnership between the Women's Commission and the Media Content Commission could really, I think, address some of these issues. I appreciate all of you esteemed California leaders for being here and staying and listening to me speak. I want to engage in conversation, but just a reminder that we all look to you as our role models. And I want my kids, Hunter in Montana and this little one in here, to look to you as role models, not the Kim Kardashians of the world. But in the 24-hour media landscape that is sending such unhealthy messages to our kids, they're confused, they're overwhelmed, they're challenged. We shouldn't be surprised that we have so many mental health issues going on right now. We shouldn't be surprised that we have some of the violent incidences that we've seen across the country when it comes to young boys and violence, bullying, suicide, depression. We're not taking care of our nation's youth only because we're letting this media world take over without understanding the ramifications and repercussions and its impact on their brains, which again aren't fully formed. So here we go. We have this organization, misrep.org, which is increasingly speaking to boys and men as we rebrand actually this coming year. I encourage you to follow us, join us. I think we have really illuminating conversations. We're taking action, individuals, one individual at a time. We have about 100,000 people who are regularly debating and discussing these issues every day online. And our biggest group of supporters are here in California. And they're ready and clamoring for change. So hopefully all together we can give it to them. Thank you.
Do you mind answering?
I would love. I prefer Q&A than talking to you.
Having a conversation, that would be great. If we could ask members to please lift their mics since it's being televised. I wouldn't mind asking the first one, unless somebody else wants to. You know, thank you very much. I'm sorry I had to miss a little of your presentation, but I came back in and I certainly got the gist of it. And I was looking through the material. I was especially struck by the article that you wrote in collaboration with Imran Siddiqui, who's the social media and communication director at misrepresentation.org, about American football culture and violence. And certainly as you read this, it makes a lot of sense, right? How we glorify violence, the cheerleaders. You go through the whole thing here, and you reference, of course, the Steubenville rape case, which just came to a verdict yesterday. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about whether or not it is actually, whether you can actually reconcile. I'm a football fan.
Yeah.
Whether you can reconcile the American love for that kind of physical aggression with the messages that you are rightfully spending your life promoting, which we all need to, nonviolence and not glorifying women in that way that sometimes football does, and the machismo, tough image that goes with being a football player. Maybe we're just picking on football, but it's an example of sort of the cultural conflict here.
Yeah.
And how do you reconcile that, if you can reconcile it at all?
Sure. So a couple things just to note. One of our good friends is a big sports agent who represents all these fantastic football players and literally has a son and says his son will not play professional football. Why is that? Because of the injury to the brain. And, I mean, he knows the damage that is done on the football field. And we're not doing enough to protect our boys in general when it comes to helmets and safety, and we know that. So that's just a side note, but something that's interesting. I think we need to really connect the dots with violence in our culture. And so anyway, my new film, The Mask You Live In, the first film, it's a part 1 and part 2 series. The first film looks at the bifurcation of gender and the extremes of masculinity that we're imposing on our boys and men through culture and through socialization. The second film picks up with the U.S. being a dominator society with this hyper-masculine, not masculine, masculine's good, but hyper-masculine value system that essentially values everything that's associated with dominance, greed, aggression, and devalues the feminine, care, collaboration, empathy. And we look at the sociological, political, and economic ramifications. And we look at everything from violence in our culture, pornography, video games, the NRA's position, blah, 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 to just capitalism and what's happening on Wall Street and with lobbyists and everything. And it's just fascinating. And there's a through line here, which you'll understand more when you see the film, which will hopefully be out next year. But there's, in pornography, you see it in the football culture. the sort of merging of violence and violence against women and sexuality. So with the recent Super Bowl, you had the halftime show and you had Beyonce scantily clad and sort of, you know, sexing it up for us all. They're always connected in a way. I mean, people that argue pornography is healthy or healthy or it's normal, blah, blah, blah. It's normal insofar as you think that misogyny is normal. It's just hyper-masculine norms. I guess my whole point is hyper-masculine norms have sort of become so normalized if we don't even realize they're extremes of masculinity. And there are certain men that speak out about that, and we're speaking with all these men in our new film series. But there aren't enough men who feel they have the voice to speak out against, and I know I'm straying from your question about football in particular, but it's the larger culture, right? It's what we've done with marketing. It's what we've done by putting sort of a value system for men over here and women over here. And I just think it's out of control. And marketers have really, you know, they benefit from it. It's easier to sort of say, okay, we only have to focus on two groups. We're going to the men here and the women here. But I think more and more, one of the reasons I'm so proud about the organization and what we're doing is more and more men, especially fathers of daughters, get that there's a problem here and that we have to do something about it. And I think with our new series, the men that haven't gotten that there's a problem here and jumped on board, I definitely think they will, because they'll see themselves in these young boys. They'll see themselves in young boys, and just to give a little bit of what I'm learning and talking with all these academics and neuroscientists and psychologists and sociologists is that young boys learn, and I hate to use the word patriarchy because it's going to turn some people off, but young boys learn a form of patriarchy and power at 4 years of age. Well, you learn it right out of the womb, but they're learning it, but they fight it, they resist it. So many boys resist it, and then ultimately, vis-a-vis all the messages that we're getting vis-a-vis mainstream media, they give into it, or they live kind of a lonely path, where they're not always hanging out with the bros and doing the macho guy thing, and it's lonely. And I'm sorry, I'm sounding. I can't really explain it. It has to be explained in one film, but I just think we have to really look at media's impact on our culture. And media from the standpoint of violence in sports, to pornography, to shootings and gun policy. It's all connected to me. I just can't really articulate it in 2 sentences for you today. Sorry.
Thank you. As the immediate past chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus, I want to thank you for all of the work that you've been doing. We deeply appreciate your discussion of these issues. And a couple of points I wanted to make. One is that, as you know, we've been through a rough time in the state of California, and we've made a lot of budget cuts. And one of the things that I have pointed out over years and years, I and others have pointed out over years and years, is that these budget cuts are falling primarily on the women and the children of the state, which is continuing to go on, and the damage is long-term, and we have to start restoring what we've done, the damage that we've done, and making sure that women and children in the state continue to have the opportunities, all of the opportunities, and the equal opportunities that California can provide. But what I really wanted to just mention to you is listening to you talk about this is really enlightening. And I'm 57 years old. I've confronted a lot of issues in my time and been the first woman in a number of different places in my career, and hopefully been able to help lead the way for others. These are difficult things to talk about. In fact, they're virtually impossible because they are heavily loaded. They're very difficult things culturally to talk about. It's challenging often to some men and some women to talk about discrimination that is systemic and that prevents more women from becoming leaders. I mean, you noted that only 25% of the members in the legislature are women.
Right.
And the number is being reduced year by year. Same thing with women in business. You name it, anywhere. It's a difficult issue to confront. And I wonder if you might just talk about how you're able, and maybe give us some ideas about how can you de-emotionalize, decompress this emotional issue and talk about it in terms of in ways that don't get people all upset and angry, but do help us all cooperatively move forward.
Sure.
Because as studies have shown, once you have 1/3 of any group being women, it transforms the whole process and it changes the whole future.
Right, no, that's great. I'm stuck on the previous question because I didn't address something that I should have addressed. Can I just address the senators? Okay, I have two thoughts really quickly. Just one of the things we wrote about in that, and then I'm going to get to you, sorry. One of the things we wrote about in that article is how, I don't even remember the percentage, but it's such a large percentage of football players carry guns. And that's again, become normalized and accepted. That's not healthy. I think we need to address that. There needs to be a national conversation around that, but I think that just like in our documentary, The Invisible War, which exposed the epidemic of rape in the U.S. military, not all military service members are rapists. It's just when we increased the numbers into Iraq and Afghanistan, we ended up lowering the bar and standards for admittance into the military. And so you had more and more offenders, so those who have committed sexual assault prior joining, and once a perpetrator, we tend to think, oh, he's a perpetrator. So I share that example, and then let's look at football. There's just got to be some sort of leadership and moral authority around violence. Just because you play a violent sport, you've got to disconnect or deconstruct that violence from violence at home or, carrying guns and that whole bit. So that's just one thought on addressing your question. But back to, it's what we're working on at misrepresentation.org, is just coming from a place of empathy and understanding that we're all getting mixed messages around gender, around our roles in society, and things have been the way they've been for so long. And it's just, I think, giving people facts. I mean, we all know, right, that if you increase the numbers of women in government and business, and you reduce the wage gap even slightly. By the way, I would love if you all reduce the wage gap in California. I mean, you could seriously, as California goes, so goes the rest of the country. If you made that very clear and standard and ensured that, it could spread like wildfire. But if you increase the numbers of women in business and government, reduce the wage gap, the U.S. could increase its GDP by 9%. 9%. So why are we not doing it? I just think stats, people can't argue facts. They can't argue facts, and there's so many facts out there. It's just they're not really getting to the decision makers. Or if they are, the decision makers haven't made them a priority. And I think we all need to connect with that inner child and that 6-year-old or 5-year-old boy that didn't want to be a part of that hierarchy, and that they call it the mean team. Some of you may remember when you were 4 or 5. Feeling pressure to be a part of a mean team and being kicked out if you were playing with the girls. We already have, our daughter came home from school one day, she's 3, and said, Mommy, I don't know why the boys don't want to play with me. And so I talked with the sociologist and I asked about all this. It's not biological. This is the socialization of gender in the United States of America. Similarly, I do think fathers of daughters, especially when it comes to women's issues, they tend to be open and get it, and I want to galvanize as many men in the media landscape who have daughters. I mean, some studio heads have called me after seeing Misrepresentation when we exposed some of the frailties and shortcomings of their studios and said the film was so powerful and thank you so much for making it. And because they connected the dots. Their daughters had body dysmorphic disorder, they had eating disorders, they had low self-esteem. They weren't going to be our future presidents and leaders. And we come from a place that seems to have worked. We don't come from, I mean, I got a lot of attacks and criticism when I set out to make this film. There were a lot of women that weren't supportive of me, and just as there were men who challenged me and thought that I was part of the problem by being, blonde and dressing in heels. And I think we just need to all recognize we're in this together and we need each other. And we need to start listening to what women have to say and stop judging them by how they look. And also recognize that they need, just as minorities, we all need a help up. And to your point, you have one woman in a boardroom, she doesn't say very much. You have 2 women in a boardroom, necessarily you have 2 women in a boardroom, and she often conforms to be this hyper-masculine norm. You have 2 women in a boardroom. Sometimes there's competition, it's scarcity, it's normal. You have 3 women in a boardroom, it transforms the culture. Things get done. So I just think, God, we have so many problems we have to fix in our state and in our country. We need each other. And if a woman's there and she's ready to do the work, then bring her in and support her. Yes.
First, I want to thank you for an excellent presentation, and I want to ditto Senator Noreen Evans for all the hard work that you've done to tackle this issue. More than anything, not so much a question, but a comment. As a father of a daughter, and the challenging times and periods, the trials and tribulations, ups and downs, I think that what we've done now today in the modern society is that we have sexualized, not teenage girls, we've actually sexualized young girls in elementary school. So the misogyny, the hip hop, for example, and not just hip hop, but other, genres of music, we've normalized, and that's the key thing, is that we've normalized what would rather be viewed or perceived as very extreme behavior.
Right.
Not to say that women have always been treated equally. Like, that's never been the case historically, but we've taken it to a different level. The hyper-masculinity, the misogyny, the sexualization of young girls. I saw Jim Steyer, who's a friend of mine, who was part of your video. Quite frankly, I represent Los Angeles, and I represent parts of Hollywood, and parts of Hollywood have been equally guilty and should take responsibility of the sexualization. Silicon Valley, which is an incubator of so much amazing technology, we have industries in Silicon Valley too who have helped facilitate now different sort of challenges that we had never ever faced before, with that facilitates the gossip, the backbiting, the cutting, of each other. And I believe that, I spoke last week at a school, and a lot of young men, high school men, and I said that, when you call, your friend in school, I used another word, but when you call them a female dog, and you say it so casually, and it doesn't even dawn on you, you just called her a female dog, but it's been so normalized, in hip-hop culture, the misogyny, that sometimes they're not even aware of it. It's almost like it's part of their normal vernacular. It's part of their lexicon without realizing. You just call someone a female dog.
Right.
Would you call your mother that or someone else that? And so, I just want to commend you. And I think in this fight, this struggle, that a lot of men have to step up, and become allies, and hopefully sort of, tackle this together. Like you said, we all have to be together, because I do believe that this also impacts women across the board, but it really disproportionately impacts a lot of women of color, a lot of young teenage girls of color who are poor, lack of access of education, pregnancy rates, although in the aggregate they're actually decreasing. Pregnancy rates are very profound in poor neighborhoods. Self-esteem, you talked about self-esteem, depression, mental health, how one feels about oneself, and then you see the messages, and the image is a certain type, a certain body, a certain look, and if you don't look that way, and if you try to aspire to look that way, you have to get cosmetic surgery to look that way, and if you can't do that, you don't have the financial wherewithal, there's something wrong with you. So there's a lot of mental health issues too in our community because of this manufactured, fabricated, industry that sends these horrific messages. So just want to thank you very much for what you do.
Thank you. Just a side, I thought this was hysterical. The neuroscientist said to me the other day, and Twitter, they said, Twitter's has contributed to a society full of narcissists. And we haven't ever actually examined the impact of narcissism on our culture and where we're headed as a result of that. I mean, just thinking about all this technology that's so fabulous in so many ways, but in so many other ways is potentially creating more damage than good. Yes, sorry. Thank you.
I also want to thank you for the great work you're doing, and I just have a quick comment and a question. I'm also a father of a little girl, and a few years ago, she came home and said, Daddy, I learned something today at school. And I said, what was that? She said, I learned that girls can also, she said, I learned boys can also be doctors. And I thought it was interesting because
so
my
funny.
wife is a physician. So
Oh, wow.
it exemplifies what you said, which is demonstration, and you learn from what you see in everyday life.
Right.
My question, though, is you're absolutely right. The media is so powerful in our society, and yet in this legislative body a few years ago, we passed a law limiting violence in video games.
Right.
And that bill, as you know, went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and was struck down.
Yeah.
So my question to you, rather to the body, is how do you control, the message that Hollywood or the media puts out?
Right.
Because we know the devastating effects it's having in our society today.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think we can't give up. I think we have to speak to people's conscience. I think we have to remind them that connect the dots for them over and over and over again. And I think we have to keep fighting. I'm right on board with you. Jim Starr, who's a friend and an advocate, I was so disappointed when with the results in the Supreme Court. And we have to engage them. One of the things we're doing at Misrepresentation is we have salons where we're engaging thought leaders in the entertainment industry, the news industry, and the advertising industry. We haven't done it with the gaming industry. They had invited me to come speak, and I don't know actually what happened, but some of the worst offenders. And I think we need to sit down at a table with them and really speak to them as human beings and connect the dots. They all came from women, right? We women give birth to everyone. Everyone has a young person in their life that they care about, a young girl, a young boy. And again, to just, I'm excited for our new film to come out. I wish it was out sooner than next January, but these neuroscientists are increasingly speaking out about the damages to the brain and brain plasticity. And I think we're going to have more tools to prove our points and more studies behind our belt, but I think as much as possible that you all can galvanize around those who are conducting the research and making sure that it's getting heard. I think that's critical. Thank you. Thanks. Are there any other questions? Yes, hi.
Thanks for joining us today. And just to say, the message communicated in Misrepresentation, the film, was very strong. And for colleagues who may not have seen it, is there a way to
Yes, thank you.
access it online? The testimony of the young women, speaking of their own experiences, and then also, as we got a taste in the clip that you showed, the extreme misogyny that we see daily on television and almost goes without comment. Female candidates for the presidency of the United States being demeaned in such simple and crass terms. In your experience, if you've had the opportunity to talk to those who are higher up in newsmaking industry, what do they tell you? That this is what they know their audiences want, so that's what they're giving them? It's a self-perpetuating cycle, I would imagine.
Right.
It's hard to believe. And then I know also in your new film, The Invisible War, it's shocking, I think, to many of us with this recent testimony in Congress that there is an epidemic of rape in our military and women have very little access to any kind of justice. It's just astounding. You can't quite believe this is happening under the auspices of our government, paid for with our tax dollars.
Exactly.
You might want to talk a little bit about the Invisible War.
Yeah. So, I'll start with the Invisible War, but just one of the most, talk about a man speaking out and doing something in a position of power and influence. When Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta saw the Invisible War, 2 days later he held a press conference and he changed the reporting structure. So when someone reports sexual assault, which by the way very few men who are sexually assaulted do out of shame, and when the few women do as well because they're afraid that they're going to get booted out of the military, which they often do, but the few women that do now will report higher up in the chain of command, so they're not necessarily reporting to the perpetrator or the best friend of the perpetrator, but they're reporting to someone at the Navy level and above. And that was a first step. It was a good first step, but it wasn't enough. As a result, obviously, we've had Senator Boxer's amendment, and we've spoken with Hagel, and we're starting to see more and more awareness and publicity around this. And you had the Lockland trial, and you have more and more sexual assault perpetrators being condemned, and that is a very good thing. But at the end of the day, reporting of sexual assault in the military needs to be removed from the chain of command and be more in a civilian system, and that's really what we're working towards. So that's one thing that I wanted to address. What was the other thing that you'd mentioned? Yes, thank you. So Misrepresentation is available on DVD, Netflix, Amazon. You can download it on iTunes. I recommend that you watch it with family members. I recommend, there are also public screenings. Every day almost there's a public screening somewhere around the world. We were told when we made the documentary that this was a domestic issue and that it wouldn't be of any value overseas. And right now we're in 38 countries around the world, both on TV and in theatrical screenings and semi-theatrical screenings around the world. I've been with the film to Abu Dhabi and Singapore and the UK, and it's phenomenal. I do more, but I can't, as we all working moms know, working parents know. You don't want to be away from your kids that often. But it's been a real phenomenon, and I recommend you see it, and I'm looking forward to you all seeing the Boys film. I think there's something that you said that made me think about the Boys film. We're in such an interesting time, in culture and society, and we have an opportunity here. And that's why, we've started this Not Buying It campaign, where consumers are calling out sexist media. We had 4 million people tweeting post this most recent Super Bowl, calling out sexist advertisers like GoDaddy and Dr. Pepper and Teleflora, and both in the past and this most recent Super Bowl. We've had tremendous success. I'm working right now. I'm infiltrating some of the big PR giants, some of whom are churning out great media and advertising, and others who are part of the problem, trying to convince them and get them to understand the damage of their actions. And I just think we need to recognize we're in this together. And so anything we can do, we're a little nonprofit, but we have a far reach. We have an active community of supporters, both men and women. As I mentioned, a big California community. And we want to support your work, especially as relates to elevating us all as a culture. And but now's the time. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and we can't give up. And I just want to reiterate, we can't put it on the parents. It's not just the parents' responsibility, especially with so many of us living in dual-income households, trying to make ends meet. You all know. I imagine it's hard for you all juggling, coming from wherever you're coming from, caring for elders who are sick and dying. It's not an easy time to be an American citizen. And I think it's really important that we recognize, no matter the bubble that my daughter Montana's in, given that I'm her mom and I'm so anti the Disney princess culture and everything that it communicates to her about what it is to be a girl, and the fact that, as my father's a hunter, but I'm not quite so sure I'll want to introduce hunting to my son. As much as I try and protect my kids, I'm raising them as human beings. I'm not raising them as a girl and a boy. My son will go to dance class. My son will sing. My son will do everything that is about being a human being. Just my daughter will play sports. And again, though, the media is infiltrating. One of my daughter's very good friends would come over to our house dressed in Cinderella with high heels on at the age of 3. That's not normal, right? And yet it's become normalized and accepted. And I think we just need to really be conscious of it. We need to speak out, and we need to connect the dots with why there's so few women in leadership. Because the culture, the media is the message and the messenger. And it's not painting a very inspiring image of what it is to be a woman and what it is to be a leader. So, thank you. Thank you for having me.